All right, so buckle up because today we are diving headfirst into World War II.
It's a big one.
It really is. And you know what they say? The bigger they are.
The harder they fall.
Well, kind of. More like the more there is to uncover. We're talking hidden connections, surprising facts, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
For example, did you know those smartphones were glued to?
Can't live without them.
Right. Those actually have roots in World War II. Wild, right?
Fascinating stuff. We'll get into all that and more as we go. But to understand World War II, we really need to rewind the clock a bit, go back to the aftermath of World War I.
Yeah, it's like trying to understand the last season of a TV show without watching any of the previous ones. It just doesn't make sense. So picture this. Europe is still recovering from World War I, economies are in shambles, and Germany, well, Germany's really feeling the heat.
To say the least, imagine getting slapped with this massive bill, this crushing debt, for a war that devastated your country.
And to make matters worse, being told it was all your fault.
Exactly. And that was the reality for Germany with the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty, especially that infamous war guilt clause, put the blame for the entire war squarely on Germany's shoulders.
Okay, so the Treaty of Versailles, it's supposed to prevent another war, but instead it's like lighting the fuse, right?
Unfortunately, yes. And on top of the blame, they were hit with these massive payments, reparations to the Allied powers. It wrecked their economy. We're talking hyperinflation so bad.
People were using money as wallpaper.
Pretty much. People needed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread.
I can't even imagine. No wonder people were angry.
Absolutely. People were desperate, and that desperation fueled anger and resentment, which created this breeding ground for extremist ideologies.
Yeah.
Fascism, nationalism, they flourished in this environment.
It's like a vicious cycle. And it's not just happening in a vacuum, right? You have these larger-than-life figures, these leaders who seize the opportunity, who use the situation to their advantage.
Exactly. And when we talk about World War II, there are three names you can't ignore: Hitler, Mussolini, and of course, Emperor Hirohito.
Each of them driven by their own ambition, and their paths tragically converge to plunge the world into another global conflict.
Right. Hitler, capitalizing on all that anger and humiliation in Germany, promised to restore the country to its former glory, to build what he called a 1,000-year Reich.
And sadly, his message resonated with a lot of people. People were desperate for change, for someone to lead them out of the darkness.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Germany. In Italy, you had Benito Mussolini tapping into that same well of resentment and economic hardship.
So Italy, they were on the winning side of World War I, right? You'd think they'd be doing okay.
You'd think so, but many Italians felt like they'd been cheated by the peace settlements, that they hadn't gotten their fair share of the spoils of war.
So while Europe's dealing with its own set of problems, what's going on in the rest of the world?
Well, on the other side of the globe, Japan is undergoing a pretty intense transformation of its own.
And this is where Emperor Hirohito comes into play.
Exactly. He was the emperor of Japan during the war.
Right.
And Japan, driven by this thirst for resources and this ambition for regional dominance, they set out on this really aggressive expansionist policy, particularly in Asia.
And Japan, well, they weren't exactly swimming in natural resources, were they?
Not even close. Japan's a small island nation. They were really lacking a lot of essential resources, especially oil and rubber, both of which were absolutely crucial for their industrial ambitions, not to mention military expansions.
So what did they do? They decided to take what they needed, like a high-stakes game of Risk, except the stakes were people's lives. And that lack of resources, that need to expand, it ultimately leads to the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Right. Japan knew they couldn't go toe-to-toe with the U.S. in a long war, so they went for the element of surprise, a knockout punch.
Hoping to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet, buy themselves some time.
Exactly. Enough time to solidify their grip on Southeast Asia. And, in those early days of the war, the Axis powers, Germany especially, they were racking up victories left and right.
And that's where Blitzkrieg comes in.
Right. Lightning War. Blitzkrieg changed everything about how wars were fought. It was revolutionary.
Yeah, this wasn't your average war. This was something else entirely. Speed seems to have been the key.
It was all about speed and surprise. But it was more than just that. It was about using new technologies, tanks, aircraft, you name it, all coordinated in this overwhelming assault.
So like a perfectly timed symphony of destruction.
In a way, yes. Concentrate your forces, break through enemy lines, then exploit those breakthroughs, create chaos. They wanted to completely overwhelm the enemy.
And it worked. For a while, at least.
It did, at least in those early stages. But Blitzkrieg had its weaknesses. Their supply lines couldn't always keep up with their advances, and over time, the Allies, they adapted. They learned how to counter it.
And it's easy to get caught up in the strategy, the big picture. But let's not forget about the human cost.
Of course not. The war resulted in millions of casualties, both military and civilian. It was devastating.
The siege of Leningrad. That's just one example that always gets to me.
A horrifying example. The city was under siege for almost 900 days. Imagine that. 900 days. Over 1 million civilians died.
From starvation, disease, the constant bombing, it's unimaginable.
It's a stark reminder that war isn't just about maps and battle plans. It's about real people caught in the middle of this.
Innocent people suffering, and then there's the Holocaust.
Right, the systematic, industrialized genocide of Jews and other minorities by the Nazi regime. A horrifying chapter in human history.
A reminder of what happens when hatred and intolerance are allowed to take root.
Exactly. But even in the midst of all that darkness, there were still stories of incredible courage, incredible resilience. Individuals risking their lives to save others, resistance movements fighting back against tyranny.
Because even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. There's always that human spirit pushing back against the darkness. But even with those glimmers of hope, the war, it raged on for 6 long years, reshaping the world as we knew it. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? The world before World War II. It's like looking at an old, faded photograph. You can kind of make out the outlines, but the colors are gone.
It's true, the world was a very different place back then, and World War II, it was more than just a war, it was a rupture, a break from everything that came before.
So what did the world look like after the dust settled? After all the fighting and the loss?
Imagine a chessboard. Now imagine someone just swiped their hand across it, scattering all the pieces. That was Europe after World War II. The old powers, the ones who had called the shots for centuries, they were gone. Or at least, they weren't calling the shots anymore.
And that's where the US and the Soviet Union step in.
Right. With the old powers in ruins, there was this vacuum. And into that vacuum stepped the US and the USSR. Two superpowers, each with their own ideology, their own vision for the future.
And that sets the stage for the Cold War.
Exactly. For nearly half a century, the world lived under the threat of nuclear annihilation, a terrifying standoff between two opposing forces.
And speaking of nuclear weapons, that's another legacy of World War II, isn't it? The dawn of the atomic age. The power to destroy the world, right there at our fingertips.
It was a double-edged sword. The technology that ended the war also had the potential to end all wars. And that terrifying reality, it led to the creation of the United Nations, an organization founded on the hope of preventing another global conflict.
The UN, for all its flaws, it's still here. It's still trying to keep the peace.
It's a testament to the idea that even after something as horrific as World War II, there's still hope for cooperation for a better future.
So we have all these geopolitical shifts, the rise of the superpowers, the atomic age, the UN. But you said earlier that some good things came out of the war, too.
Oh, absolutely. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And World War II, it forced humanity to innovate at an incredible pace. Take computing, for example.
Computing? You mean like those computers we use today?
Exactly. The need to break enemy codes, to process information more quickly, it led to incredible breakthroughs in computing technology. Breakthroughs that paved the way for the digital age.
So that's how we got from deciphering Nazi messages to posting selfies online. It's amazing how it all connects.
It really is. The war accelerated technological development in so many fields. Medicine, aviation, materials science. It's hard to imagine where we'd be without those advancements.
World War II. It's more than just a chapter in a history book. It's the foundation for so much of our world today. And as we've seen, it's a story with so many threads. Threads of conflict and loss, but also threads of courage, innovation, and hope. We've got tons of resources linked in the episode notes. Books, documentaries, museums, all kinds of ways to keep exploring this fascinating and complex period in human history. And until next time, keep asking those big questions, because here at The Deep Dive, we're always ready to dive in with you.